All right. Thanks everybody for joining. Looking at the agenda for this meeting. Jeremy, are you on the call? Okay, I don't see Jeremy.
Sorry, Jeremy's not here, but he asked me to speak on behalf.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, take it away.
Well, I think it's EDA Yang. I think this is about your thing about user impersonation and
Yes.
Istio CTL. I see you're in the call. Maybe you want to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, I think we really want to introduce this flag in the Istio control command to easily support the impersonation. So I think Jeremy replied us that the community actually had the similar discussion like 4 years ago, but maybe due to some like hesitation or I think maybe we can just revisit that feature, and then we want to see how other people or other folks think about this feature now. Because right now we do use this impersonation heavily in our internal, like we don't want engineers interact with the cluster directly, so we introduce the cluster at the main and then using impersonation as a flag to require them to remember which role they are using. Kind of a very good feature we want. And I think supporting that in Istio control is not too hard from my current investigation. It looks like we can just use the kube client provided feature. Any thoughts?
Yeah, has anyone used this function before in kubectl? I've never used it myself, so I think if I understood correctly, the request is add a similar function to Istio, so user can use this s dash s or dash s group when they enter their Istio command, so they can say I'm impersonate as this particular user or as this person or as this group.
Yes, exactly. I think we do use this kubectl flag a lot right now. So
Something that Jeremy did want to mention, he said that I didn't super understand it, but he said something about how it might not be as simple as we're just passing flags through onto kubectl, and we may have to look at the flags themselves too. So it's not just like add some CLI options. I just wanted to bring that up. I don't remember what he was talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, adding the flags in kubectl seems to make sense, but if there's more, maybe Jeremy can come back and because it sounds like you're not sure what exactly he's talking about either. So we don't have a clear representative to represent him. Am I understanding you correctly, Stephen?
Yeah, I'm just reading his comment. He's like, to be sure we're not undermining the security and operational stability of Istio, we probably need to get some input from others. Something. There's a chance that we're missing some necessary cautions around a feature like this where user privileges are involved. Yeah, that's what he said. But yeah, I can let him know that it seems that people are. It seems reasonable, and as I understand it, you just kind of want pass-through flag. So I can just let them know.
All right, I saw some comments in the chat. Ben, do you?
Yeah, there's some discussion here, I guess. I don't know if you guys have already talked about this, but like the old workaround was you create a context which has the user impersonation you want, and you just use that context, right? It seems like, and then you could just, that already is supported. You can have 5 contexts, each with a different user, and then you could just pick the context you want and impersonate that way. That works today, if I'm understanding correctly. The issue is they want to be able to impersonate directly without using contexts, because that's the argument they're making, is that's safer. That argument I don't really understand, because it seems like, what's the difference between supplying a specific context with dscope permissions versus supplying a specific user with dscope permissions? Like, it comes kind of to the same thing, and that part of it is what I'm having a like. I don't know what's so much safer about explicit user versus explicit context with an explicit user. Like, it kind of is the same thing, it feels like.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question. Just to provide some context, right? Like, lots of folks in the community use kube context and kubeNS, which set, the kube context environment variable. And so that leads to effectively like ambient cluster admin or ambient, elevated privileges, right? So the minus as is not able to be provided by a environment variable, and thus, like, we look at it akin to like sudo, right? You obviously you can like sudo su and then you're root, but like in general, the best practice is to just run like elevated commands with sudo individually, right?
Right, but I mean, how can you not do that with context, right? Can like what? How would it be? Yeah, like I don't. Yeah, what the thing John has, like, you can give it a different context each time. So how is that any different than giving it a different user each time?
I think the point is the default context environment variable, right?
Oh, because people are used to setting defaults. And okay, so the idea is that because people typically habitually set a default context, it avoids.
Or like with kube context, if you have 100 clusters, right, you use kube context to just set the context for the cluster you're working on, and then ideally that context is just a read-only context, right?
So you can't set a default user impersonation, so therefore it's quote unquote safer. Okay.
So do we add a Istio cattle config file next to kubeconfig and with a bunch of users, or have a dedicated user or some sort of more automatic selection or downscoping?
How do everyone feel? I personally feel that's overly complex to add a configuration file to Istio cattle.
Yeah, I think if we agree this feature is useful, but maybe a flag is easier.
Between flags and environment variables, sometimes it's easier to use environment variables because you can set them in a shell, you can set them in a partially RC, you can set them. Command lines are always a pain.
Right, but I think the point here is it should be a pain. They don't want to set an environment variable because then you might accidentally forget and use the wrong user. It's supposed the goal here is to make it so every time you have to be explicit about what user you're using for every command, and there is no implicit environmental default. If I'm reading it right.
Yes, correct.
We cannot break backward compatibilities. I mean, it needs to be opt-in somehow. I mean, it's not, and I think if you set the user, it's more likely to know. I mean, assuming that we don't break backward compatibility.
I don't think we're changing how Istio cattle works. We're just adding a new flag. It's the user's kube configs that they have, that they set, are read-only privilege. And so what we're adding is the ability to, it's basically like the flags in kubectl. How it works is it reads the kube config, and then the flags kind of overlay on top of the kube config. So you take their kube config and add the impersonate command.
Yeah, no, my point is, if it's a command line, if you forgot, you run Istio cattle and forget to put that flag, you're stood. If you set an environment variable in partial C with your service account or whatever, it's a read-only or low privilege user, then it's less likely and it's a better user experience. That's the trade-off, in my opinion.
But I think it's the opposite, right? We want the defaults, like we want Istio CTL by default to use the same kube control defaults or kube context, right? So the as is like an opt-in, not an opt-out.
I'm not sure we can change the default behavior Istio Cuddle because a lot of people are using.
I'm not asking. Yeah, we're not asking to change the default, right? We're saying like if you provide ---- as, just pass the flag when you construct the kube client to the impersonate user.
Oh, that's reasonable. I don't have a problem with that. I was just pointing that it may be easier to have the run as an environment variable. Anyway, it's fine either way.
The problem with environment variables is that they can stick, just like the context that is implicitly set in the kube config. While
right.
---- has to be explicitly provided to the command.
Depends what's your goal. I mean, if your goal is to never accidentally run as root, then yes. I mean, having a variable stick, it's a feature, not a bug in this context, because you want always to. I mean, anyway, that's fine. Either way is fine.
As long as we're like sticking to exactly what kube control does here semantically, I don't have a problem with it. Yeah, and like if they change it so that you can, for instance, set a user and environment variable so that breaks, like, and we just have to follow that. As long as we're following exactly what they do, I'm okay with it, I guess. That may change, but
kube config environment variables that can point to another kube config that has a different default.
Right.
Right,
but not for the user specifically. Like I'm okay exposing the user flag exactly as kube control exposes it. Like I don't see a good reason not to do that.
By the way, I believe in kube config you can specify run as. There is one field somewhere. So basically you can create a separate kube config and just use kube config as another way to do it.
Yes, that was the workaround that they were going to use before, but they don't like that because you can have a default kube config, which can confuse people.
Yeah, kubectl has a variety of flags. There's like 15 of them that are basically overrides for the kube config, so you can.
Yeah.
On the sort of sticking to kube control defaults, there's this package that I think John posted in one of the issues called generic CLI options, right? That basically just inherits all the defaults. I'm wondering if it would be a heavier change, but
yeah, I was looking at that. I mean, there's definitely use. The only things I worry about is one, adding like 20 flags that the majority of people don't use, and then cruft up the help info, and whether / how much it integrates with how we're doing kube config construction. It might be fine. I'm just not entirely sure. Whereas like just adding the impersonation flag is, it's like 10 lines of code. So if that's all our goal really is, then I will. Yeah. I just don't want to make sure. Don't want to be like, oh, we want to add one flag, so now we're making this massive change that's gonna block you guys for even longer. So I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I'm just not sure how well it fits really with Istio Cuddle. And what we need is pretty small. The generic CLI options has a bunch of stuff for fetching resources that I don't think we need. Like we would only need the flag part, which is fairly minimal.
Yeah, that sounds good to us, I think. Right now, we just need this impersonation flags. It's all we want.
All right, I kind of wrote down the consensus. Do we have consensus here to move on, or there's more questions to this custom?
One more question. Did we consider turning Istio Cuddle into a kube plugin and then kind of inheriting whatever kube cuddle is? So instead of doing Istio Cuddle minus whatever, do kube cuddle minus whatever you want, Istio Cuddle as a command, and then whatever we need.
Yeah, so when you make a kubectl plugin, kubectl doesn't provide anything for you. The only thing it does is that you name your plugin kubectl-istiocuddle, and then you can call it kubectl space istiocuddle. It doesn't do any flags or anything like that. So that's what the generic CLI library thing is making it so it looks like kubectl in terms of the flags. So the plugin aspect is not really useful in any way, I think, but maybe you are saying that we should use the generic CLI options.
I'm saying we should use the generic CLI options because I think crew is using the same thing, and the whole idea is to have the same UX as kubectl. So if it's kubectl Istio, then it's implicit that all the parameters that kubectl expects are, unchanged.
Would that be a much bigger discussion, though, If I understood correctly, you're changing how user interact with Istio Kado.
You just need to rename istio-kado to kubectl-istio and or create a link and should work even today. It's just a matter of UX. I mean, how the parameters are passed. I'm not entirely sure if all of them work. But if we do what John mentioned, I mean, I think it will work like any other Crew plugin. And I don't know about download because Crew also has a, you know, you do kubectl Crew install Istio or istio-kado, and then you can do kubectl-istio. It's nice.
But can we separate those two as two things?
Of course.
Okay, because right now, if I understood correctly, the Microsoft team has a lot of user wants these two parameters. What I wasn't sure is if there's consensus for folks wanting to use kubectl Istio, which is a general refactor of our Istio Kado commands. And so I don't know, I don't understand the needs from users other than the discussion here and also the staffing to do that work. So that's why I prefer to separate them if we can, so we can make incremental progress.
I think as long as they don't divert, I mean, if my understanding is that if they use the same parameter as kubectl, then we are on the right direction and it's the same thing basically. I mean, it's the whole idea is to just use exactly the same parameters that kubectl is using. There is nothing else special about Crew. I mean, everything is already possible. I think I tried it once. But not to introduce new flags, just use exactly the same flags that kubectl is using, which I think that was a goal here as well.
Okay, got you. So you are worried if we move to kubectl Istio, then the work, if we were to do the work as group flags, that work would be thrown away as we move to kubectl plugin model. Is that correct?
Yes, and yes, there are subtle differences between kubectl plugin and the others, but I think they're more or less aligned.
Okay, got it. So I guess the ask maybe for Microsoft team is to do an evaluation and come back to us to see what you guys think about that.
Of like the three options, like Crew, kubectl plugin, and kubectl equivalent flags.
Yeah, the two options from an implementation perspective. That's one thing. The other thing, I'm also cautious. For personally, I'm cautious changing Istio Kado to kubectl Istio. Like, I almost feel we need to also maintain backwards compatible with just telling people, hey, we're moving to the Istio plugin for kubectl. You know, that's a lot of a hurdle to tell people, in my opinion.
Okay, so it's from we're comparing kubectl like Istio versus having pass-through flags.
Right. Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, if you
correct.
understood costing correctly, right, you could potentially write a plugin for kubectl. In that case, you get the params for free. So that could be potentially an option. And then the other option is just simply as you guys all propose, just add //as and //as group as existing Istio Kado.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, we're gonna do the --as thing by itself, and then we're also gonna evaluate doing the pass-through flags versus the kubectl Istio.
Well, maybe just evaluate that for now.
Okay, but what's that?
For kubectl Istio.
Don't worry about it. As long as you follow the, I don't think we have to do much stuff. I mean, it's just as long as the parameters are passed correctly and we don't invent new things, I think it will be perfect. Just make sure you use exactly the same parameter that kubectl uses.
Okay. So you're good with the consensus right now? Then
No. I was good already. I just wanted to make sure that I raise a bit awareness about crew and how useful it can be for people who like it. I'm using it all the day, every day.
So,
All
so
right.
just to summarize, we want the as thing as like a flag, and the crew stuff is cool, but like that's maybe for another day.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right. Sorry
Okay.
about the confusion.
No worries.
I think we're
That's
ready.
why I was a little confused.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
no
was going to
flags.
draw the consensus and then Carsten raised the hand. So I think we're good now. Actually, if you are good, I actually really like what Ben did. If you are good, give your thumbs up here so we know the action with the consensus. So we know you recorded the consensus today. So I assume, did you guys see this? So go ahead, not in here. I appreciate you do it in Google Meet, but can you do it in the meeting notes so that we have the recording there? Okay, thank you. Because one of the challenging with our community is driving consensus and also not be able to record the consensus. So now we have it recorded in meeting minutes. Hopefully you don't take your consensus away. All right, thanks all. Let's move on to the next topic. Sulin, I saw you on the call. Can you take us through?
Yeah, hi. So I brought this topic up 2 weeks ago. So we're currently looking into moving to Istio, and one of the differences with Istio and our current Envoy service mesh is that we use locality load balancing more heavily. What I pitched last time was creating something that is a combination of the distribute and failover fields in destination rule. But after playing around with virtual service and destination rule, I think I was actually able to get something very similar to distribute and failover combined. But it is missing one piece, which is the new feature that I am now pitching. So essentially, I'm wondering if we would be interested in introducing match expression to destination rules, specifically when creating subsets for the destination rule plus virtual service combination. I did see it was mentioned in a previous doc in the Istio configuration model that match expression would be like maybe something to be implemented later on in the future. And the reason why it would be useful would be because with the way that we're doing failover configuration, we're saying maybe like the blue cluster and the green cluster will be failover of each other, but there's also an option for users to bring down an entire blue cluster or green cluster manually. And when they do that, we have to withdraw those endpoints from the failover of the other cluster. So right now, without more sophisticated label matching, we're unable to do that. Right now, we only have like a binary choice of booleans. So if we were able to use match expression, which is something that comes from Kubernetes, we would be able to also say from this particular group, take out the failover group, but maybe keep it in somewhere else. So that way we wouldn't have to like also fail the health checks of that endpoint. Sorry, this is also my first time pitching one of these RFCs. So let me know if maybe a different format of presentation is preferred. If I should maybe just go over the doc point by point instead.
No, this is useful. Thanks. So just to clarify, the only change that's being proposed is to allow in subsets a match expression.
That's correct.
Can you give some examples in the doc?
Sorry about that. I think in the doc it mentioned like don't write code. So I didn't, I tried not to write code.
Oh yeah,
Um,
don't write code by meaning
right.
implementation, but if you have an example YAML, that would be very helpful.
There's one at the top in the background. Yeah.
Oh yeah, is that the proposed change for the destination rule? That's what I didn't quite understand.
Right. Let me pull up destination rule real quick. Subset. Okay, so I'm just grabbing this from the public documentation. So here is how you define the label matching for a subset. So what I'm suggesting here is that we added an additional field, but probably you would say like you're either going to use match expression or you're going to use labels, and this would be the format that it would be in, and this would match the format that Kubernetes uses.
Got it. Is there any chance people might be want to use both?
I think we should probably limit them to only use one or the other.
Yeah, in Kubernetes, it's always one or the other. There's no reason to use both because match expressions can do everything labels can do.
And I think I also linked to the code where I think this is where the subset label matching is happening. And if this is correct, it seems like the endpoints, they all get fetched, and then there's some filtering that happens in memory. So if that's the case, then I think it'd be very easy to add some additional filtering to implement something like match expression.
Yeah, I agree. I was looking at the implementation on the call, and it's probably fairly straightforward. I mean, there is one risk that it is a very performance-sensitive code path, and match expression is going to be slightly slower. But it's still not. I don't think it's that much slower. I mean, all the expressions are only exists or doesn't exist and things. It's not like it has crazy, like regex matches or anything weird like that. So it's probably fine. And obviously only people that use match expressions have to pay that cost. So we just need to be aware that it's performance sensitive, but I don't think that should be a blocker necessarily.
Yeah, you pay for what you use. That we are not removing labels. I mean, we cannot remove anything. So if you use match expression, it will be a bit slower, but you know what you're doing.
Okay, I have a simple question. This is me not understanding match expression very well. So the key, like the grouping and the key of the region, I assume that's not a label. Where would that be coming from that you do matches?
The key and the values are the label key and the label value. So like the equivalent of above is version in v3.
Okay, got it. So you could translate the label version 3 to this expression potentially.
Yeah,
it's more
exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Okay, got it.
I think it would be something like version
Yeah.
v3.
Yeah.
Okay,
exactly.
got it. Yeah, thank you. This is
Yeah,
a
so it's
much
just
more
purely
real
more
way.
flexible
Yeah.
pattern. Yeah.
And this is like an all relationship, I assume, right? Between the two expressions.
I think it is an and.
It's an and.
Yeah, the Kubernetes documentation goes into more detail around this. So, I think it's here in this link, the requirements. So even with these match expressions, you can't do everything. But I think this is good enough. I think last time when I talked about combining failover and distribute, there was a suggestion to not modify custom resources like destination rule, would the recommendation here be to put this somewhere else initially, or can I attempt to put this directly into destination rule?
With the, I think I made that recommendation. With this change, I think it makes sense to put in the destination rule because it's a standard way to use labels. I think workload, sidecar, and some other resources we have already used this pattern, and it's very common. It's just a straightforward extension.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be harder to put it in other places for people to use.
If it's something far more complicated, more advanced, that is not just extending label pattern, we should discuss it. But if it's just label selectors, that's no questions that it fits there.
Okay, and this shouldn't have any backwards compatibility impact, right? Because if I'm not using it, it shouldn't activate that code path.
Well, roll back, and I mean, it's if you're careful with the upgrade, yeah, it should be fine.
Okay. All right, any other objections to this? Are you looking at rolling this out in the next Istio release? What's your timeline?
Well, this will be my first contribution, so I will work on it as my priority, but I don't know how long it will take. Maybe a couple of weeks to make the contribution, and let's say it comes out in 2 weeks, then when will it be part of the next release?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Okay. Yes, I am very optimistic.
All right. Sounds like I'm not hearing any objections from the call. Sounds like the direction seems reasonable. So thanks so much for taking us through this.
Yep, thank you. This is, I think, a good approach. Feel free to ask me any questions you run into. I have familiarity with all the parts you're gonna have to touch on the code, so happy to help out.
Oh, thank you. May I reach out via Slack?
Yep.
Great, thank you.
All right. I think that reaches the end of the agenda. Does anyone have anything else to discuss? If not, you guys get 20 minutes back. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.